10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Game over.
Welcome to Game Over Montreal. I mean, listen, it is the same, but it's not the same. That was a lot better. Yes, the Montreal Canadiens dropped another game, but the fact is, this is kind of what you want. This is the ideal scenario. They played well, but couldn't get it done. I'm going to bring in my guest today, Laurie Bennett. How's it going, Laurie?
Going good. All is well.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bit of a refresh. I mean, here, I feel like we're going to talk about it later in the show, but the whole Dom Ducharme thing, I think people have taken the license to like go in on him a little bit too far, but we'll get to that. Let's talk about the game first, because this is the first game of the Marty St. era, and obviously one of them got called back, but Cole Caufield scoring twice. The first time, maybe a coincidence. The second time, I don't know if I think it's a coincidence anymore. What about you?
Totally different player tonight. Just a totally different player. The way he scored, went backhand top shelf on that first goal, sniped the second. Yeah, it was called back in the offside, but just shooting with a totally different confidence. A couple of beautiful passes, one to Foley, one to Suzuki that they couldn't finish. But we haven't seen him play like that this season, frankly. We haven't seen him play like that since the playoffs. So whatever happens, I don't know what happened overnight, but whatever happens certainly is having an effect for Caufield.
Yeah, and I kind of speculated as soon as I woke up and saw the news yesterday that Cole Caufield was probably not going to spend the whole time on the fourth line under Marty St. Louis. And I think there's conversations to be had about how his development was handled this year, both by the Canadiens organization as a whole and Ducharme. But I think that it's very fair to say that sticking him on the fourth line, even while he was struggling, was just not a recipe for success.
It was ridiculous. Like, it was, if that's where you're playing Cole Caufield, send him to Laval and let him play top line. Excuse me. And I saw him in Laval when he was there, and he wasn't playing with confidence. Calling him back up at that point, the body language was all wrong. It felt rushed at that point, because I think they knew that he didn't really belong in Laval either. But it just wasn't working. It wasn't working in Montreal under Dom for whatever reason, but it worked tonight.
Yeah, and I think like people who are putting it all on Dom, to be fair, like we saw Cole play under Dom last year. He was fine. So I think there was a confluence of things that happened this year that led to this result for Dominique Ducharme. And, actually, let's get into it, because I've alluded to it a couple times here. Let's talk about Dom Ducharme, because I think both of us have criticized him pretty heavily this year for good reason. I think he deserves to be criticized heavily for a lot of the ways that he's handled things. But at the same time, I think both you and I have been very frank about the fact that he was dealt a terrible hand coming into this season. He's losing essentially his entire leadership core, all the veterans that kind of carried them through last year's playoffs. Then injuries happen during the year that are just like, how can you even? It's unprecedented what's happened to them. Then you're also dealing with COVID. Then you're also dealing with just like guys not caring pretty much right from the outset. And I think you could say, to be fair, he didn't find a solution, but I'm not sure if anyone could have. I saw a very fair comment today. Someone mentioned to me on Twitter that was saying that Dom probably wasn't ready to coach in the big leagues without the veterans there, without guys like Weber and Price being in his corner and pushing everyone else in the right direction. And I think that is a comment that isn't necessarily saying that he'll never coach again in this league. It's that he wasn't ready to coach this disaster. And who would be? It's a huge disaster. But I think he's going to be a coach again in this league. His track record of success coming into Montreal was very long, but yeah, this is a move that had to be made. Like, it was obvious it was going to be made a long time ago. I'm glad they cut bait.
Yeah, it was time. When Gordon announced initially that they would stick with him for the season, I had no issue with that at that time, just because of what this season will be used for. But there is no plan to compete for playoffs. It will be, the lower they drop, frankly, it will be better for them in the long run. And making a change, to what end? But it became putrid. And I like it's impossible to say what specifically went off the rails. I mean, they spoke so highly of Dom last season, and the team performed well for him. I thought Paul Byron's statement around it was, was pretty strong, that they bought into Dom last season. They played for him, and I don't get the sense even today that the players dislike the man.
Yeah.
But something went off the rails pretty early for the Habs this season. And I mean, you could say, yes, like, how about losing Shea Weber? How about Carey Price checking into a player assistance program? How about Joel Edmondson being injured? How about Phil Deneau being in Los Angeles? Yeah, all those things are true. But for me, there was, maybe it was just, they didn't believe that they could do it. Like that all the players that were so significant to them in the run, that the guys looked around the dressing room in that first day of camp and went, holy crap, we're screwed. And it's like they didn't, from camp, it didn't, it felt like from camp onward, that there was at no point where it looked like they were confidently taking on the season in any way. And Dom paid the price for it. I mean, in some ways, he's his worst enemy, for sure. Some of his calls are bizarre at that, but the hand wasn't a good one.
Yeah. It's like, it's not one thing. And I think that it's very human to find one thing that's gone wrong and say, like, it's this, but so many things have gone wrong for the Canadiens this season. I think that you look at this kind of disaster season and the fact that they're on pace for, I think, like 14 wins over, and like less than that in regulation, right? Because they've got one in the shootout. So it's bad.
Yeah.
You can't get to that point without a multitude of factors going against you. And that goes, I mean, we haven't even talked about team construction, because frankly, from that perspective as well, he was handled a terrible hand because, I was watching the Steve Dangle podcast earlier this morning when I was getting ready for my Game Over International show. And they'd mentioned that they'd read something that, like, you can judge a general manager by how their team performs when they leave, like what they've left off with. Pretty harsh situation to look at Mark Bergevin in. Like, hard to imagine that this was the plan.
It's impossible to imagine this was a plan. And when you think about it, I mean, certainly when Ken Hughes took over, he inherited a better cupboard than Bergevin did, perhaps. I'm not sure that he inherited a better product on the ice than Bergevin did. But in terms of what he had coming up through the system, in terms of a cupboard, I think they're in better shape than when Bergevin came. But when you think about it, they were in desperate need of a center when he arrived, and in desperate need of a center when they left. They were too dependent on Carey Price when he arrived, and when he's gone, and Carey Price is out, and they're done. There are some pieces. Certainly, but and I don't think that Bergevin inherited the amount of financial impossibility that he left behind. Certainly, so it's the season is he's gone, and it's kind of like he's evaporated. But this season wears the fingerprints of Mark Bergevin all over it, and Dom paid the price for it, and he's not blameless in it either. But certainly, he didn't. A lot of the issues that sit with this team aren't what weren't his to fix. And
I mean, to a lesser extent, it's almost the same situation. Not the same situation, but similar decision making as when Claude Julien was fired, right? Like, that wasn't really on him either. That was just a change needed to be made, and that was the easy change to make and the obvious change to make. Obviously, I think Claude Julien is a much better coach than Dom Ducharme at this point in time. I think he's one of the best even strength coaches in the league to this day. And the special teams were just terrible under him. And, Carey Price was dealing with his issues unbeknownst to us at the time that led
Yeah.
to him being very underwhelming for 3 years in a row, essentially. So there's lots that happens in the league that a coach is not necessarily at fault, but they're not part of the solution either. And I think that's where Ducharme finds himself. And I hope that we don't see as much sniping. Like, I don't know if you saw EJ Radek from NHL.com
Yeah, that was
calling
brutal.
him a phony and a fraud. And it's like, man,
That's brutal. Like that's and based on what would you say that? Like
that's the thing. And
that's
I feel like
it's
Ducharme was
nonsensical.
also a victim of his entire coaching career in Montreal being stuck in COVID protocols, right? So like every other coach, media gets to know them on a personal level. You talk to people in media about Claude Julien, they like wax poetic about how he's such a great guy. Like I've talked to Brian Wilde about a time that Claude helped him like boost his car one time when he was coaching Boston. And you hear all this kinds of stuff. With Dom, we never got to know him on a personal level. Not really. So unfortunately, I think it's easier for people on the sidelines to snipe at that person who you only see on TV behind the bench. And I saw like a few people posting that like Marty St. was on the bench, like encouraging Cole Caufield and talking in his ear, and like never saw Dom do this once. I'm sure that Dom did that with Cole Caufield. Do I keep a record of times I've seen the broadcast pan to a coach on the bench and talk to a player? No, but I am sure that he didn't never talk to Cole Caufield. Like that doesn't make any sense. There's no way he would act in that way as a professional.
No, I don't believe that. I don't believe that he was a bad guy. Like I think that the players probably liked him as an individual. They probably, if I'm honest, I started to find Dom tedious to listen to. That said, if it were my task to have to face the media every day after the performance that he would have to speak to, that would not be a fun job either, to have to go out and explain that every day when you probably know that you've lost it, right? Like for whatever reasons, that you're not able to pull this back together. That would not be a fun job responsibility every day. But like I had, there was one red flag that I had for Dom, and it had nothing to do with X's and O's or relationships or anything else. But there was an interview that Eric Engels did with him early in the season, and there were several times, there were 3 or 4 times in the interview where Eric gave him an opportunity to reflect on himself and what he might, having come off this season and now going into a new season with a ton of change and everything else, how he might want to adjust, what things that he wanted to work on, what changes he wanted to make. And he kept, I don't know if it was deliberate on Eric's part. It might have just been, a line of questioning that he never, that there was no deliberation around whatsoever. They were pretty logical questions. But each time Dom was unable to say that he needed to adjust in any way, shape, or form. Like I actually wrote about it back in November, but there was no point where Dom was able to say, I'm going to need to lean upon this differently, or I'm going to need to, with this missing, I'm going to have to do this. Maybe, a younger team, maybe I need to do it. Like there was nothing that he was able to say. And sometimes that's less about a person's, who they truly are and more about how well they communicate. So like, I'll give that level of grace. It might just be that, he's not good at talking about himself in an introspective sort of way. But for me, I saw it at the time and I sort of ignored it. And then a couple of months later, when I could see what was unfolding, I wrote about it. And, like he's a double down kind of guy, right? Like he would go down that path and then he was just, how many times does Brendan Gallagher have to say in the media that he's sick of having a rotation of line mates before Dom hears that in some way, right? But still, like the next game, he's got a new set.
Yeah.
And, it's
part of that's driven by injury, but yeah.
Sure, but yeah, just it's that was the flag for me about Dom, that I didn't know, like, I'm not sure, and I think that's a maturity thing. I think that's a growth thing, when you're able to stop and look at yourself and say, holy crap, I am missing the mark on something here, and I've got to make an adjustment. And to really, like, rather than making little tweaks or trying, or doubling down, you actually go away and say, where did I go off? What's really missing? And who are you talking to around that? There was even a question from Eric around what he was learning from other coaches. And even the answer to that was somewhat disappointing. Again, it might be a communications issue, but for me, it just sort of left me going, not a lot of self-reflection here. And that for me, that's a red flag. I mean, that's an occupational hazard on my end, but yeah, it's a bit of a red flag in terms of where, when trouble comes, what he's going to be able to do with it.
Yeah.
And trouble certainly came.
I wonder how much of that is, Marc Bergevin had the very same attitude, right? He was not very self-reflective and not willing at all at any point to admit a bad decision or a mistake. Everything was, I know more than you. And Dom didn't have that kind of aggressiveness to him when he was questioned, I found.
Yeah.
But definitely a lack of communication in terms of transparency of decision making, all that kind of stuff. And I think that's what frustrated me about the whole situation with Ducharme was, once the season was very obviously lost, I expected, as a young coach who was under a new GM trying to show that he deserved to be coach next year, that there would be a plan in place to essentially show, like, moving towards next year, what are we going to try to take positive out of this season? Are we going to put, Caufield with Suzuki and Toffoli and say, listen, guys, if you struggle to find chemistry at first, that's fine. Go out there and make mistakes, create some offense, find what makes you special, because you're all going to be here next year. Or, Suzuki, Caufield, and Lehkonen, or Suzuki, Toffoli, and Lehkonen. Like, any combination that makes sense of players that are going to stick around, find that and put it out there. But instead, it was constantly, like, balancing lines to be competitive. And it's like, but guys, you're not competitive. It doesn't matter if you have balanced lines when you're giving up 7 goals a game. Like,
the balanced line, the 200-foot game, the, defense first, the building out from the net. We've had a decade of that, perhaps more, that more really when you think about Martin before, but like that sort of, it's that we've talked about it for years in Montreal, right? The playing not to lose, the playing that you can't have one line that might be weaker. You got to have, and what actually happens is you dilute every line. And we've watched that unfold for years in Montreal. And I think we're going to see a shift. I suspect that there's going to be a significant shift around that.
Yeah, I think so too. I think there's going to be a very clear change in philosophy, both in, like, player acquisition, style of play, who gets rewarded for what, essentially, or who gets demoted for what. I think there's going to be a lot of changes that are very easy to see, even if they aren't necessarily communicated under this new management and under this new coaching staff. And, frankly, the whole Martin St. Louis thing, let's move into that. It's out of left field. There's no way to sugarcoat it, right? He has very little coaching experience. He's coached, I think, AAA, under 13s. So this is very much a Kent Hughes saying, this guy's going to be the next Rod Brind'Amour, because as much as he's signed on for the next 2 months to finish out the season, I don't think Martin St. Louis didn't come to the Montreal Canadiens to coach for 2 months. This is a play to be the next Rod Brind'Amour, who, people forget, had 0 coaching experience when he came into Carolina and immediately was quite effective and has gotten better every season. So they're trying to build something here. They think Martin St. Louis has the temperament, the experience, and the intelligence to get this done and build towards the future. I will give them the benefit of the doubt, although I will say the Vinny Lecavalier rumors are interesting, but I am a little bit hesitant about the idea of Hughes coming in and bringing in a bunch of guys that he knows as his first move, because it's the same thing that Mark Bergevin
Yeah,
did.
it
Is he
is.
came in
Yeah.
and hired all his buddies. And I'm not saying that they're necessarily yes men, because frankly, I mean, if you're going to bring in a bunch of former players, a bunch of like high-end offensive former players is more interesting than a bunch of grinders, which is
For sure.
which is what Bergevin brought in. So
Yeah.
there's that shift anyway, but I would like to see some very clear diversity of thought being hired in the organization. Now, I've heard through the grapevine that there is going to be an assistant GM named relatively soon. So, and I heard it was not LeCavalier. But
Okay.
LeCavalier is still
Debating.
in talks for something
Yeah.
similar to what Scott Niedermayer is doing in Anaheim, according to, I think Pierre LeBrun said it today on the broadcast.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he would not be like in Montreal. He would get to stay in Tampa Bay. I'm not sure what that role would be, but interesting nonetheless. But I hope we don't get into a situation where they just bring in all their friends and nothing really changes drastically, because I want to see radical change.
For sure. And some of that's natural, right? Like, especially like I think about Kent Hughes coming into this absolute shit show and having to, build like a completely new team. It's a bit of a default, but it's also kind of essential that if you know some guys that can do what needs to be done, then you fill some roles fast. You need to get some bums and seats to get some work done. And if you know that you can do that, that's great. Like you, I hope that we start to see some diversity in the ranks a bit, that the names that start coming out. And frankly, I hope it's a big team. There's no excuse for Montreal to be running on a small crew.
Yeah.
And I hope it's a big team that has, significant diversity in it. My own suspicion, and it might be wishful thinking, but my own suspicion is that right now he's hiring guys that he knows can fill specific roles because he needs to fill some positions fast. And then you'll see him, supplement that group with, more thoughtful processes, I hope. And that's not to suggest that either LeCavalier or St. Louis are not thoughtful. I loved, the thing I loved most about St. Louis, frankly, is that nobody predicted it.
Yes.
There was nobody, he was on nobody's list. There was no pundit saying, keep an eye out. I'd keep my eye on St. Louis if I were you. Nobody was saying that. And that's something I love about it. I love that he was a skilled player. When was the last time we had a skilled player in Montreal, a skilled player coaching in Montreal? And then the comebacks to that, or, a skilled player doesn't necessarily translate into a good coach. No, it doesn't. But we don't have a ton of examples either of skilled players who ended up being shitty coaches.
Right.
We have Gretzky, right? Who else?
That's the one that always gets brought up. Yeah.
Right. So, and it's not like St. Louis was a skilled player who was coddled and, didn't have to work for anything and was, showed up with the number one draft pick for 3 years before he was drafted and was going to, had the sun shining out of him his whole career. He worked to get where he was going. And he was a skilled player, yes, but he wasn't, there was no privilege attached to that. He didn't get there out of privilege. And so I like that piece of it. And I love that both him and Hughes are talking about an offensive minded team. Yeah. Hello. Can we start to think about putting the puck in somebody else's net instead of just keeping it at ours? Those are the things I like about it. I mean, obviously there's all the flags that you talked about. It's a significant leap to go from what he was doing to what he's doing now. But we've seen some guys take steps that were nowhere near as significant in the leap and not do so well. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, and speaking of St. Louis' impact, I mean, there was a quote posted in the stream chat here earlier from Josh Anderson saying that the last game he was embarrassed, and tonight it seemed like everybody was engaged. And they were. I mean, I feel bad saying it because it's like bullying at this point, but if the Canadiens had NHL goaltending tonight, I think they might have won that game. They
did win that game.
Yeah.
There were 4 goals allowed that should not have gone in the net. There were 3 goals for sure that should have never gone in. and even if it was Montembeault in the net, I think wouldn't have gone in. Primo, like it's for me, it's not bullying, it's sympathy. Like this is exploitation at this point. Send him down. This is not his time to be there. Montreal is not the place right now to be throwing a kid to the wolves every night. And,
it doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
They've got to figure out something there, whether it's finding a goaltender on waivers or making a small trade. It doesn't have to be a great goaltender. It just has to be somebody who can play in the NHL and not have their confidence blown out the door, because I just feel bad for Primo right now. It's very hard to watch. He's still a kid, 22 years old, I know, but
it's heartbreaking.
It is.
Seriously, I would rather they go find that Zamboni driver guy and give him a contract for the rest of the season and fire him in the net once in a while and let him get blown out, because there's no future for him in the NHL. But what's happening for Primo right now is nasty.
It is.
I think in fairness, they've been busy, right? They've had a bit on the go. So it's hard to criticize them for not having done so. And they've got 48 contracts in the books, and they've got, cap issues, and they're trying to work through actual trades to improve the team for the long term, I'm sure. But find somebody, cross the border over to Ottawa and see if you can hire one of those truck drivers that got nothing to do, and throw it. Throw him in the net, for the love of God. Reduce.
Oh man.
It's sad to watch.
It is. And there's a stream comment here asking if Montembeault was injured and that's why Primo was starting. Yes. Montembeault, they've been very clear, does have a nagging injury. That's why they've been hesitant to put him in there. And somebody was asking if maybe that's why he had some rough games before. I mean, I think it could be, but also I don't think he's that good. He had a good stretch there, but he's not a NHL starter quality. He might end up being a backup starter, like a backup quality guy, but at this point, I think he's very up and down and has been all season. The Canadiens haven't done him any favors, but he also has not been great. I do want to address, there's somebody talking about how we're being unfair to Marc Bergevin, because he made the conference finals and the Stanley Cup finals once each. I guess twice for the conference finals, because you have to make the Stanley Cup finals. But they're saying that he did a great job building the team, built them for the playoffs. Here's the thing, though, Greg. If not for COVID rules that gave the Canadiens a different schedule last year against only Canadian teams, or allowed the Canadiens to get into the playoffs, finishing 24th in 2020, the Canadiens would be in the midst right now of missing the playoffs for 5 straight years.
Yeah.
5 straight years. It's never happened in Canadiens history. The worst ever in Canadiens history was 3 straight years. So we can talk about being built for the playoffs all we want, but the fact that Carey Price put on 2 unbelievably remarkable performances 2 years in a row does not negate the fact that the Canadiens have been terrible in the regular season for 5 years. And that's despite, Claude Julien bringing some blood from a stone in a few of those years at even strength. It just hasn't been a good scene. And you see what's in front of you right now. The roster construction is terrible. The contract situation is even worse. And I know Laurie was saying that he might have left the Canadiens in a better situation than he inherited them. I think there's some areas that's true. Yeah. Like Nick Suzuki, I think, is a great piece to have going forward. Cole Caufield is going to be a great piece going forward. But I look at what he inherited also, and I see PK Subban, Carey Price, and Max Pacioretty all in the prime of their years. Brendan Gallagher as a rookie. He inherited a 3rd overall pick in Alex Galchenyuk, who as a rookie put up the best even strength points per 60 of any teenager in the NHL since Sidney Crosby, right? So there's a lot of things going his way.
Yeah.
And he turned that into nothing. Not into nothing. I'll say he turned Max Pacioretty into Nick Suzuki, and that's an absolutely fantastic trade, I think. Even though Max Pacioretty is still great. But just based on ages, it just makes sense. But for the most part, he accomplished Not much. Like, he spun his wheels. He could never decide on what kind of team he wanted to build until he decided that he wanted a bunch of physical, grinding, big defensemen. And then as soon as he did that, the team was terrible.
Yeah. It's not about an indictment of Marc Bergevin. I mean, you can point to the things that he did well. There were some trades that turned out very well for the
Fabulous
Habs.
trades.
And he managed to pull off some decent contracts for a while. He kind of threw that out the window in the last year or so, but he had some guys on some really good value contracts for a lot of years. There were things that he did well. There's two giant gaps for me with Marc Bergevin. One of them is this, that I never had a clue which direction he was going in. I never knew what he was trying to build. I could look at an individual move and say, that is a beautiful puzzle piece. But I would look at it and I couldn't see the rest of the puzzle. It didn't fit. It was like I had a bunch of blue sky, but over here it was a cat. It didn't go together. And so, that's the first thing. And the second thing that I would say about Marc Bergevin was that, and I'll compare it to what Hughes said. I think it was just today he said it, when he said, we could bring in some pieces that would make things better for this year and could have perhaps helped Dom this year. And I don't know if the target is to help Dom or if it's to help Hayden Primo at this point, but he said we could have done that. But we're not looking to build for this year. We're looking to build a team that will be competitive for years. And that, for me, is a really sharp contrast to make it to the playoffs and anything can happen.
Yes.
It's a really sharp contrast to trades are really hard. It's a really sharp contrast to this isn't PlayStation. It's a really sharp contrast to nobody wants to come to Montreal. Taxes, cold weather, pressure of playing here. There was always the thing that I always struck me about Bergevin in particularly in the later years was how defeatist he was, how much he had decided it couldn't be done. And perhaps in 10 years we'll find Kent Hughes in the same predicament. But I really, it was really fun last spring. The year that they went to the conference finals, that was really fun.
Yeah.
But man, do you was it Greg? I don't know you, Greg, but do you remember the Stanley Cups? Do you remember what it's like to be competitive for a lot of years in a row? Do you remember what it's like to hardly ever miss the playoffs? And every spring, I have memories of eating Easter bunnies around Stanley Cup playoffs. That's how I grew up. And so it was fun last spring, but it was a gift. They fell in backwards to the playoffs in a bad division. The year before when they made it in, it was a gimmick, a play-in tournament where the kids showed up and did some great things. It was so much fun. But did anybody really believe that team was going to become a regular contender? I don't think so.
No. I mean, did anybody really believe they were going to beat the Lightning last year?
No.
I mean, maybe in the back of your head, you think maybe you Price can pull it out, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, in all honesty, it was Toronto was a little bit shocking, just because, and yet not because of Toronto and its situation in the playoffs.
They're the Maple Leafs.
And then Winnipeg was like, holy crap. But after they beat Winnipeg, I thought they can do Vegas because I saw the team similarities there. But, it was always going to be a dream to beat Tampa. And it was a ton of fun. But I, a ton of fun once every few years on a series of events that come together in a perfect storm. I'm really hoping that they choose to build a team that has us talking playoffs every year.
Yeah.
I want to be having my spring trip early so I don't miss any playoff games while I'm in the Caribbean. That's what I'm looking for. Yeah.
100%. And, there's a quote that has been posted several times in the stream chat now. Cole Caufield after the game says, I grew up wearing number 26 because of him. It's crazy now that he's my coach. That's incredible.
That's amazing.
That's
I'm
like,
so happy for Cole Caufield.
you think he was wired tonight? Like, you could tell
Oh
from his
yeah.
first shift.
Yeah.
Here's a question, Lori, and we'll put this answer in the chat as well. Over under 15 goals for the remainder of the season for Cole Caufield.
Oh, that was game what? 46?
Yeah, there's 36 games left.
36 games left.
Do you think he can get that hot?
I think he can. I think he can.
So too. I think he's going to do it.
I think it's really, I actually had the thought tonight, oh God, like it's his rookie season. It's too bad that he didn't get this opportunity earlier, because if this is how he's going to play for the rest of the season, the other thought I had was, do you remember last season when Montreal had a ton of games that went to 3-on-3 overtime, and they would always throw out their penalty killers from 3-on-3.
Yeah. I felt so bad. People hated on Phil Deneau so much for that. It's like, he's not choosing to go over the bench.
It's just, I love to make that joke, send a good job, guys, send a PK for your 3-on-3 overtime. But do you remember then when Caufield was signed, and there was a couple of games where him and Jeff Petry, 2 times where Petry just nailed him with the perfect pass in the 3-on-3, and Caufield finished.
Yeah, that's how they made the playoffs.
Yes, and it was like skill knows skill, right? And are there 2 players this season that show off how devastated the Canadiens are this season more profoundly than Jeff Petry and Cole Caufield?
Yeah,
it's how far it's dropped. I think he can hit around 15. It's going to be interesting to see. I think some of it's going to depend on how they clear out and what they, how much damage they do come trade deadline, and how thin the team looks. And
I think he's going to get a lot of ice time. That's for sure. Especially
he's going to get a ton of ice time.
Yeah, I think
he's going to get a ton of.
Give him all the opportunities in the world. I think he does it. Another comment in here, now that you mentioned Jeff Petry, from the post game tonight, was Jeff Petry said that the clarity of defensive responsibilities tonight made it easier to spend less time in our own zone. Jeff, tell us how you really feel. if there's anyone in that room, and I don't want to say that the room quit on Dom. I don't actually believe that. I think that it's just the room quit on the season more than the coach. But I don't think Jeff Petry saw eye to eye with Dom Ducharme.
I don't think he did. And I mean, it sounds like there's other stuff going on for Petry, and whatever's happening with his family and so on. I hope it all gets sorted, and if they're able to be together. Like COVID and a pile of youngsters with a husband who's gone half the time is not a fun time for poor Julie, I imagine. So needing to be around family support and stuff makes an awful lot of sense to me, and I hope they're able to work out something for him. But it's sad to me. Like, I don't believe Jeff Petry's washed up, and
No.
The contract's not long beyond here. I think he is someone that has leadership potential. That ship has probably sailed. It's probably too late. But I find it sad knowing that less than a year ago he was firing beauty passes to Caufield and they were going in the net, and that took him to the playoffs. It is what it is at this point.
Yeah, I mean, less than a year ago, I would have said that if Weber was traded over the summer or had retired, that Petry would have been my pick for captain. And it seems like the relationship is pretty damaged at this point. And I hope he recovers his play under the new coaching staff, because he's a player that I've really liked for a very long time now. Has been, in my opinion, the best defenseman on the Canadiens throughout the last 5 or 6 years. Yeah. And I hope wherever he ends up that he's happy and that he and his family can be reunited, because I know that I can't imagine how tough that's been.
It's been hideous. I mean, we're all employees dealing with, some business of kids at home, and, they've got how many kids? 3. And I think she's pregnant again. And at different ages. I think one of them's in school and so on. And think about that schedule where the Habs had no home games and all the games were moved away. how long Petry was gone, and she was
Yeah.
there, and her family is, out of country. It's not a fun time. I mean, I'm surmising a bit. I mean, perhaps she just wanted to go home. Who knows? But it's a situation that makes some sense to me. I'd love to see it work out for Petry, but I also think that, if it's best for him to move on, that I think they can fetch a package for him, and it can work for both players. So, for both parties rather. But
Yeah, that was I was pretty interested because like I've been on the Petry isn't broken train the
yeah,
whole season, right? Like things are going wrong, there's mental mistakes happening, obviously, but like his underlying play is still overall relatively solid. It's just that there are moments in games where he loses his mind and does the dumbest possible thing that has not really been part of his game. And a better situation where he's calm and happy would probably fix that on its own. So to see, I was reading some stuff from insiders recently saying that if the Canadiens choose to trade Jeff Petry, it might not have to be at that much of a discount because he's still very, very well thought of in NHL circles.
Yeah.
So I do think that they are going to trade him. I don't know if it's going to be at this year's deadline. I assume that it might be, but he does have term left. The thing is, if Petry can get back to even 80% of what he was last season, his contract is not bad. Like people
the
think
contract
that
isn't bad.
6.25 million is a lot. It's not for a guy who plays 22 to 24 minutes a game, like, and dominates players when he's on, so
and scores 40 points.
Exactly. Like this is a good player who's had an awful season, not a bad player who's being exposed. I did see a comment here from Dylan Hume saying Petry was better than Makar literally last season. I wouldn't go that far. That's a little bit far for me. Cale Makar is pretty damn good. I mean, I think he's the best defenseman in the world right now. I will say that I think you look at Makar play and the highlights that he's able to perform, go back and watch young PK Subban. PK Subban ran or walked so that Cale Makar, could run. Very similar to see how he skates around the ice, although Makar's a much better skater than PK. I think PK had good edges, but he doesn't have anywhere close to the top end speed or acceleration that Makar has. Man, that kid is incredible. I would kill for a Cale Makar to watch every single night.
I don't think he's available.
No, you got to find the next one. Unfortunately, you got to do the hard work. But that kind of brings us back to Marc Bergevin, right? Is why they're in this situation. And to talk about what Greg was posting as like the things Marc Bergevin did well, I agree. For the most part, trades great. The last couple of years did better in free agency, despite the fact that he was very defeatist about it. The Tyler Toffoli contract is honestly one of the best in the entire league. One of the reasons why I don't want to trade him. But development is, under his tenure, the worst in the entire league. And it's actually not even close. We had Shane Malloy on the show a couple times in January, and he broke it down just by essentially every metric. The Canadiens drafted somewhat okay and developed exceptionally poorly. No team has developed worse than the Montreal Canadiens over Marc Bergevin's tenure. And, frankly, it's easy to say hindsight is 2020 now, but that trade for Dvorak, I think they can still get value for him. I don't think he's part of like the rebuild, but I think they probably just should have kept that pick.
When you look at where they are now, they absolutely should have just kept that pick. I mean, that's, with hindsight, what it is, the pick would certainly be more valuable now. That said, it won't shock me if he's moved. It won't shock me if he's someone who has moved at the deadline, because I think just like the league hasn't forgotten who Jeff Petry was before this year, the league also hasn't forgotten who Christian Dvorak was before this year.
Agreed.
And there are teams that, what he brings, a playoff team will enjoy. There's a couple of teams that can really use a third line center right now. And he's pretty good value. If they chose to take back another contract in the deal, I think they can probably get that first back.
Yeah. And maybe even move up a little bit.
And probably move up a bit. So, there's, it won't surprise me if he's part of the consideration, but maybe not till after the season's over. It'll be really interesting. One of the things I was thinking about it today, one of the things about having Bergevin around for as long as he was, is that he started to get kind of predictable. He used to love to say expect the unexpected. And yeah, I mean, like, when he chose to sign Toffoli, I remember being floored that he had pulled it off. But it's kind of like every deal, even when you didn't see it coming, every deal you could look back, you could easily file it into one of Bergevin's folders, right? But it just fit with everything you knew about him after being around for so long. And that's not true with these guys. We have no idea what they're going to do. We can kind of guess some things that make sense to us for them to do, but I wonder if they're going to swing for the fences and try to bring in someone that's more franchise altering than just chipping away at bits. I don't know. We'll see. But it'll be really fun to start watching some of those small deals, or not small deals, some of those first deals, to see what their footprint is going to look like.
Yeah,
for sure.
It's an interesting situation, and I agree that Dvorak still has a lot of value around the league. I think you look at his offensive game, and despite the fact that it took a long time for him to get going this year, his offensive numbers are fine this year overall. Yeah. One of the better guys, like relative to career average on this team, where most guys have just had a massive career dip. It's the defense that's fallen apart for him this year, and he's never been a great defensive player. I think, like, you look at like the WAR metrics and stuff, and he's like 35th percentile or something for forwards. But this year he was like the single worst in the entire league. And that's like outlier level that I'm like, that's not going to stick around. And I think most hockey people would see that and say there's more to this player. And he's got a great contract for being able to digest it. So
I can see him being somewhere like Calgary. And I think about something like, I think that he would thrive under Sutter.
Oh yeah.
And they've got an expensive center out there right now who's languishing and playing deep in the lineup. If the Habs were prepared to send Dvorak their way and take back that big ugly contract, I wonder what else they might be able to take in that sort of deal. There's lots of teams that could use what he brings to the table come playoff time. But who knows? I mean, there's, one thing I caught that you said today that I kind of chuckled at was, he was very quick to pipe up and say, there's going to be changes, and this is just the first one. And it kind of had an ominous feel to it, like, oh God, like here it comes, like this could be big.
Yeah, there's like the weight for the guillotine to come, right? And now it's down, and they're just rolling it right back up. The next head's gonna roll.
Yeah, and they've not said, if they're doing a full rebuild, or if it's going to be a retool, or one of the other rewords. But there was some commentary today that sounded very much like the letter that was issued by Gordon back in New York, when he said, we have a team that we could build around and compete now, but we want to build to be competitive for years. And that very line, that exact line about being competitive for years, is straight from that letter to the fans back in 2018. So it sort of makes you wonder, like maybe this is going to be a full rebuild and things. And if that's the case, we could see some pretty significant shifting happening between now and training camp.
Yeah, I think a lot of what happens between now and training camp is going to depend on how certain players play the rest of the season out, right? Like, who wants to be here? You got to show it. I wrote that for the Montreal Gazette essentially a couple weeks ago. It was like the players who want to wear that crest, we already know who they are, right? And maybe there's more in there, but they've got to show and prove that they do. Because you want guys like, as much as Bergevin harped on character way too much for my liking, especially considering he seemed to not really give a crap about off-ice character, but character does matter, and in this instance, like passion for playing for the Montreal Canadiens. And sometimes it comes from guys that you wouldn't expect it to come from, right? Like Tyler Toffoli.
I love him.
He wasn't signed by Vancouver, right? The Canadiens were his second choice, but him and his wife, Kat, absolutely love it here. They embrace it here.
Yeah.
That's special. That means something. So I think those kinds of players, you got to keep them around, at least some of them.
Yeah. I think he's, I like what he has with Suzuki. I think that just keeping them around just for that purpose. They've got 2 more trade deadlines that they can get a killing from him. They can move him next trade deadline or the one after, but I wouldn't do it this year. I would hold on and let him be part of the leadership group going forward. I mean, there's so many questions about, like, I don't know if Gallagher wants to stay. He's starting to look a bit miserable too. I'm not sure if he's going to be interested in the second round. It looks like Petry's on his way out the door. Sherratt is going to be gone. Byron, Byron is who he is. Like, he may, it won't surprise me if he's around for the rest of the contract. It's another year after now, but they're going to need some guys. Where's Joel Edmondson? Like, did he like fall off the face of the earth? Like, it's like nobody's even talking about him anymore. Where is he?
Yeah, that's the mystery around Joel Edmondson's back injury, and him and the nagging injury that Price is dealing with in the rehab from the knee surgery. It just seems like everything that could go wrong has gone wrong this year. Yeah. It's nuts to think that, like, Price and Edmondson will not have touched the ice at the Bell Center 50 games in.
Yeah.
If
they do it all. Do we even have a return time on Edmondson?
I feel like he's been week to week the entire season. Yeah, he had to go to deal with. Skate? I don't think he's skating right now.
I don't.
He had a setback relatively recently. I think he had a setback relatively recently. But Price is skating at least. I know he was testing out his knee the other day. He had like a 25-minute session. So there's room there. But again, we don't know when. Sometimes it just takes time. I think the other thing that, like, I've seen a lot of people say, like, oh, well, the surgery that Price had, that's like a couple of weeks recovery. For an average person, not a professional athlete. Not a goaltender who puts an incredible amount of strain on that knee.
Right. And who's had surgeries and injuries before that.
Yes. And has to be ready to take a Chris Kreider smashing him in the leg on a breakaway, right?
Right.
Like, you have to be confident that knee isn't going to blow apart the first time you take a little bit of contact. And the average person just does not deal with the amount of physical attrition that a professional athlete does. So it's very hard to compare average recovery time from an injury with, a later career professional athlete.
Yeah. I was having a thought the other day, he's a big man, and the trend certainly seems to be toward those giant goalies. But I wonder if the position itself, I mean, certainly having all that size in front of the net helps. But I wonder, with all of the knee dropping and the twisting and so on, the shifting from side to side, and the pressure, and like you said, people falling on you and all that jazz. I wonder if a smaller body would handle it better in some ways. Like I don't know. I don't know how that works, but and it was kind of tragic listening to him when he did his press conference, and you kind of got the sense that he wasn't sure he was ever coming back. Like, he really wants to, but you can see the doubt in his own mind. And
there's an admission that it's possible that it doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
And hopefully the fact that he's been skating pretty consistently means that things are going well this time, and he's not suffered a setback. And maybe he won't suffer a setback this time, and he'll be back, but we just don't know as of yet. All right, I think that's all we need to talk about tonight. I feel like we've covered everything. I think everyone's excited to see what Martin St. Louis can get out of Cole Caufield. I think the stream chat was also pretty significantly on the over for 15 goals. So yeah. So we'll see. Maybe we should place some bets on that. Maybe it'll be like a game over specialty bet. Cole Caufield 15 goals the rest of the year. But before we go, Lori, tell everybody where they can find your stuff.
You can find everything connected to my Twitter account, Lori10Habs, and some significant stuff posted at Habadder, WordPress.com. And I also write for Wreckhouse Press. com. I had to think about that for a minute. So, but all of it's attached to Twitter. You can find it all there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks everyone for watching the stream. As always in this season, if you're still watching this show in this season, we really appreciate it. It means a lot. Shout out to Dodger Toffoli, the Toffoli dog. Everyone keeps on saying the dog is the best content from the Montreal Canadiens this season. I mean, that's probably true. Dodger Toffoli, the MVP. All right, everyone, we will see you again. I won't see you for a bit because Julian McKenzie is going to host both of the afternoon games this weekend. And because I'm going to take the weekend off after covering the Olympics all week. And also, I'll see you all again for Game Over International in less than 8 hours at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time today. And then again on Monday.